think I just need to leave this slide up with this avatar photo from LinkedIn. Everyone loves it so much. So I'm really excited to be the person after lunch where everybody is trying to maybe wake up. So I'm going to try to bring the energy as much as I possibly can. And anybody who knows me knows I like to walk around, pace as I'm talking. So hopefully I'm not going to make anybody nauseous. So let's get into it. Here we go. So to talk about a new operating model, I want us to take a step back. We've had a really weird 4 years, and this has been looming over the whole conversation today so far, which is effectively 4 years ago, if you guys can remember that far back, right? We were all just starting to understand that, oh yeah, this COVID thing, this is kind of here to stay, right? And I think for sales, there's been a lot of impacts from COVID, but I think for sales, the biggest impact is it hastened the end of geography as an organizing principle for sales. I mean, think about it. You can put your best seller right beside the HQ of your best prospect, and when they actually try to sell to them, the buying committee is going to be all over the world, right? So, like it or not, most every sales interaction, you can still get on a plane, but most interactions are going to happen remotely. So we dealt with that, still dealing with that to some degree. Now, ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, right? So it's a good times. Do you guys remember that? And also, do you guys remember this guy? Anybody? Show of hands? Okay, so I'm dating myself. So he used to come on late at night. He'd do these infomercials about how to get free money from the government. And what did we do? We got free money from the government. It was great. It was a big party, right? We used it to grow. Growing was easy. We hired a bunch of people. And then, like any good party, there was a little bit of a hangover. And this is him now, so this is rough. But we're in, I guess, PEG, right? If I'm gonna follow Sam's lead here. Profitable, efficient growth. We have to figure out how we are going to run our organizations efficiently and effectively going forward, and ultimately responsibly. We got a little bit responsible right there. So now, one last challenge, one last shock that we've been dealing with. And I know you didn't think I was going to go through a presentation here without saying the word AI, so congratulations, you're right. So anybody who tells you they know how AI is going to play out in this world is lying to you, selling you something, or doing both when they post on LinkedIn. But I think the thing to take away from this is I have been in software for a long time. I'm a software engineer by trade. I have spent a lot of time working with machine learning and AI. And what I can tell you is that the old models, the old ways of doing things, they helped around the edges. They gave us better propensity to buy models. They transcribed our conversations. They did that sort of thing. But this new form of generative AI, the ability to consume and contextualize and ultimately create content, it's fundamentally different. And sales is uniquely vulnerable to this type of AI. And when I say that, think about what the sales role is at most organizations. It's an agent acting on behalf of your company, doing a lot of online research, having a lot of semi-structured online interactions, and this person gets paid maybe more than anybody else in the company, right? So there's something really interesting about this, because when you look at what this kind of AI is capable of, well, it looks kind of like that, right? So what all this means for us as sales leaders and CROs is that we need to accept the fact that these shocks are permanent. We are not going back. And so it's not about building teams that have mass now, that literally and figuratively take territory. It's about building teams that can operate in an unreasonably efficient manner. We need to be faster, lighter, more agile. That's how we're going to win. And so I think we need to take a step here, and hopefully I'll do my little part here today to give you some thoughts about how to do this, to figure out how we move from scrambling to respond to the last 4 years to getting a firmer footing so that we can actually move forward, to having some ideas about how we can actually do the next 10 years of sales in this new world. And I think, and I believe that in order to do that, we need to think differently about how we run our sales organizations. And so let me introduce you to somebody to help you think different about how you run your sales organization. And not this guy, somebody you probably haven't ever heard of. Air Force Colonel John Boyd. Anybody ever heard of John Boyd? Okay, good, a few. I would love to give this entire talk on him. He is an absolutely fascinating guy. He was many things. He was a decorated fighter pilot in Korea. He actually developed an entirely new way of thinking about how aircraft maneuver using stolen Pentagon computer time in the 70s. He almost got court-martialed, but instead he ended up as one of the lead designers on the F-15 and F-16. Fascinating guy. But it wasn't just aircraft. He was a strategist that influenced all sorts of American military approaches. And he actually got brought out of retirement in 1991 during the first Gulf War and helped design the American strategy that was so successful there. But the thing that I think is most fascinating about John Boyd is that he used to go around the Pentagon in retirement and give a 327-slide, multi-hour presentation about his ideas. And that is what I wanted to do today. But instead, you are going to get 25 more minutes of this. So, I said he was a lot of things. One thing that he was, most of all, was a deep thinker. He thought differently about how the world should work, and I think we need to do the same thing. So, he talked a lot about this idea of creating and destroying concepts, synthesizing, destroying, rebuilding. And that's something that we need to do. So let me introduce you to a concept that he's responsible for that I think we all as sales leaders need to be aware of. And it's called the OODA loop. So first of all, he was a deep thinker, not the best acronym comer up with her, I think. But how many people, only 2 people had heard of John Boyd, so how many people have heard of the OODA loop? Okay, good, good. I had done an informal poll of people that I had met prior to this, and basically I was 0 for. So good that you guys have. So good, this will be a new concept. Hopefully it's useful. The idea behind the OODA loop that John Boyd introduced is it's all about winning in complex environments. Obviously that's true in a military context, it's true in a sales context. It's meant to be applied in real life. So this is a framework that I want everybody to kind of take home with them. It starts, like any good strategic framework, with the world, what John Boyd called the environment. And the world creates data that we observe. We are constantly observing data. We observe a whole hell of a lot of Salesforce reports, right? We observe things from transcripts of sales calls. We are pulling in that data. But here's one of his insights was that, yes, we observe all that data, but it's just raw data points. We have to orient ourselves around that data. We take what we know, what we understand, what we've learned in our career, and we combine that with the data to ultimately make a decision and act. Observe, orient, decide, act. OODA, OODA. Here we are. All right. Now, that all makes sense, but like I said, he was a deep thinker, so he thought about things a little bit differently, and he said, look, we don't orient ourselves in a vacuum. So a couple of ways that plays out. You decide what you want to look at. You're not looking at all of the data in the world. You're looking at the data that you think is relevant. And you take actions based on what you're comfortable with or what you've realized is a new action that you need to take. So you're in control of these things, and your orientation helps you decide that. But as they say in the military, the enemy gets a vote. In this case, the world responds to our actions. We get competitive response. We get customers and prospects responding, right? So we get that external response. And then finally, we get internal feedback. We get feedback from ourselves on whether it worked. We get feedback from our CEOs on whether they think it worked. And we get feedback from our reps a lot, all the time, maybe more than we want, right? So here we are. This is the OODA loop. So I want to put this in context here. So when we think about how this applies to sales, this brings us to a logical question if we start thinking like John Boyd, which is, what's slowing down our OODA loop? And so what I'm going to present here today, and I think you probably already guessed, but what I'm going to present here today is it comes from a somewhat surprising source, and it's something we don't always think about as CROs. So I want to tell you a little bit about an experience that I had. So I didn't really introduce myself much at the beginning of this, but previously I was SVP of revenue operations for a pretty good sized company. We had about 600 sellers. I was, at the time, running RevOps for that team. We had an interesting structure. Somebody mentioned the whole SPAC mania earlier. We were publicly traded and PE controlled. So let's call it the best of both worlds there. But it was EBITDA. That was huge, right? And so I kind of went through my own journey thinking about how we solve some challenges, and it was kind of an OODA loop journey that I didn't even realize I was doing at the time. And so we had a challenge. We had 600 sales reps. Those sales reps are extremely expensive. Those sales reps are not attaining. We're not hitting our numbers. We're not going to be generating the earnings we need. Our EBITDA is not going to be good. Okay, we're screwed. Let's figure out something to do, right? And so, like any good revenue leader, I started observing. And as I observed and I looked at where we were making investments in rep efficiency, what I saw was, okay, we're spending a ton of money on enablement and training. I've got a team devoted to that. Good. Could it be better? Yes, but we're focused on it. Okay, we're spending $200,000 a year with ZoomInfo. Awesome. And at least we've got phone numbers and firmographics, right? Then we're spending $400,000 with outreach. Also awesome. Sorry if I don't think outreach is here, but okay. So the reps can make the dials, I can send the emails, we can do all of that. And so I'm looking at this scenario and trying to figure out, what is the situation? What can we do to improve? And so zooming out from me for a second to, I think, all of us, if you look back at the challenges that we all are facing right now is tech. We've heard so much tech spend, right? I'm a technology vendor, so, here it is. But we spend a lot of money on tech. We have created a bunch of enterprise value for all these technology vendors. And what has it gotten us? 50% maybe attainment, right? 50% of our sales reps actually hitting their number. And actually, if you've been paying attention, and I'm sure you all have, last week, Salesforce's quarterly earnings, 37% of their reps are actually hitting their number. This is Salesforce. This is the cloud, right? So we're struggling. So back to my story for a second. We tried to figure out what was going on. What could we do differently? And it turned out the answer came from a surprising place, and may not be too surprising after Kathleen's introduction, but it came from territory. Now, I would imagine a few of you, maybe all of you, have carried a bag at one point in your life. You've probably been given a territory. So you've seen both sides of it. As CROs, the territory carving process. The once a year, we all get in a proverbial room, sometimes real, sometimes not, proverbially smoke-filled, sometimes not, I don't know. We get our spreadsheets and our pivot tables, and we horse trade, and we carve up the world into patches, and we do revenue potential, and then we get up at our SKO, and we say to the reps, here you go, we have this great new territory plan. You guys are going to love it. You're going to crush it. But in your heart of hearts that somebody's getting the equivalent of Northern California and somebody's getting Northern Arkansas. And those things aren't quite equal no matter how much you try to pack them together. And from a rep perspective, right, and you've been reps, you've been there, if you ask a rep why they left their last job, you'll get one of three answers. You'll get my manager, my comp, or my territory. It's an incredibly frustrating place to be. Now, what do we do about this thing that sits at our foundation of GTM? So let's go back to the OODA loop and think about how this works. So think about your pipeline generation, the way in which you actually build the lifeblood of your business, right? How do we generate pipeline? Well, it starts with an account strategy. Great. Get your ICP, figure out your account list. Next, you figure out your personas. Who are you going to call? The actual human beings as well as the titles, right? Then you got to have something to say to them. What are we going to say? What's our messaging going to look like? And then finally, we got to do that stuff enough times to actually make a difference, right? So we have to have activity. So if we build all of these layers on top of each other and think about this from a pipeline standpoint, the thing that you should think about is how quickly do you gather feedback and iterate at each of these layers? And I would posit to you that these top 3 layers, you do it extremely quickly. We are constantly changing who we call. We're constantly adjusting our messaging. If you've got SDRs, I can guarantee you they are meeting weekly to tweak messaging, and you're constantly, at least, trying to impact activity, right? So you're taking that feedback from the world, you're orienting, you're deciding, you're acting, you're changing, and yet, at the foundation is our account strategy, where we operate not on a daily or a weekly OODA loop, we operate on an annual OODA loop with maybe a couple of tweaks here and there. So this sits at the core of our GTM motion. So for any of you CROs who are here and think territory is a RevOps concern, right? It's not. It's your concern, because everything you do is built on top of that. And so I want to talk about how we might actually see the way this impacts you in the real world, so that hopefully I can convince you it really is your concern. So one of the things we do with a lot of our customers is we take them through a coverage analysis. We actually get all the opportunities they've created, we get all the activities they've done over the last year, and we actually look at what happens in their current territory design with how they cover the accounts that they're trying to cover. And we see some really fascinating patterns repeat themselves, and I'll just share one quick one here. So you see this lovely unlabeled graph? All right, so each dot on this graph is a sales rep. It's a territory, effectively. The x-axis is how many accounts they have in their territory, and the y-axis is how many opportunities, not opportunities per account or anything like that, raw opportunities they create. So you can see something fascinating. You look at that trend line, and for a little while, the line goes up and to the right. More accounts equals more opportunity. But then something really fascinating happens, and we see this over and over, and we call it the prospecting plateau. At some point, that relationship breaks down. And as you start to get a little bit larger, the amount of opportunities starts to just be divorced from however many accounts you have. And then the most fascinating thing, I think, is this little tail right at the end. As you get past a certain threshold, you actually get less production than you do at a lower threshold. And the reason for that is kind of embedded in this chart. Each column here is a territory. The red are uncontacted accounts in a territory, and the blue are contacted accounts in a territory. We are doing this once a year carve, and we are trying to create a single view of revenue potential, and we are overloading our reps. We are trying to give them so much opportunity, quote unquote, that we're actually stifling them. And we're not getting that feedback, because the only time we can change this is next year, right? So this is at the core of how we go to market, and it's fundamentally broken. So that begs the question of, I don't know, what would John Boyd do? How would we think about this differently? And so I would posit that the way we would think about this differently is to say, instead of that once a year carve where we're not collecting feedback, we're not able to move quickly, and we're overloading our reps, what if we operate in a more dynamic way? What if instead of trying to carve up that entire TAM once a year, we actually figure out how we can allocate really good books of counts to our reps on an ongoing basis and capture information and position those accounts? And that's what we call dynamic books. So let me dive into that a little bit further. So in the dynamic books model, it's different from a static territory model. I'll put it in context in a minute. But so here's how the model works. Let's say, and I'm going to keep these numbers easy so that I can do math in my head while I'm standing up here, but let's say you've got 10 reps, right? And you've got a choice. You can give each rep a couple thousand accounts in a geographic territory at the beginning of the year, or what you can do is you can say, well, let's do some analysis and say, how many accounts can those reps actually work based on what they've been able to do in the past? And let's say it's 100. Again, I'm going to try to keep my math easy here. So what could you do? Well, at an initial point in time, take all of your accounts, stack rank them. Look at every firmographic data point that you've got, any information that you've got, any intent that you've got, stack rank them and take the best 1,000 at that point in time and give 100 to each rep. Forget geography, forget all of that other stuff that you might put into a territory design, and you give it to them to start working. And what do you do with the rest of them? You don't ignore them, but you put them in a ready pool. So they're sitting in a pool, marketing is nurturing them, you're still working on those, warming those up, hopefully driving some intent, right? And then your reps are over here working their book of 100 each. And what do? If they're good reps, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to close that business, they're going to turn those into customers, or they're going to learn something. And that's key. Every sales interaction is an opportunity to learn something. And what reps do in this case is they might learn, hey, this company's out of business. This company just got acquired by a competitor. This company cannot make progress until they hire this person in the next 9 months, right? Or, hey, this company's under contract with a competitor for the next 12 months. You learn those things. In a static model, the reps just kind of shunt those to the side. And I'm, no offense to reps, because it is an incredibly hard job. That's probably not getting logged in your CRM anywhere. That information just disappears into the ether. That's valuable feedback from the environment that you don't have. And so in this model, in the dynamic books model, reps actively disposition accounts with enforced rules of engagement, but with reasons. You're capturing that data. I can't make progress with this because, right? And that feeds back into the system. You can take those accounts that you can't make progress because they're under contract with a competitor or because there's just not an opportunity right now, and you let them rest a little bit. You nurture them. The accounts where there's just something fundamentally broken, you disqualify them. So what's going to happen over time is you go from 100 accounts with each rep to 95. So what do you do then? Well, you proactively stack rank your accounts and distribute the next best set. And that virtuous cycle continued. And the benefit of this is that you are always, no matter how much quota capacity you have, how many reps, whether that goes up, hopefully, or down, hopefully not, you're always working your top accounts. And you're not locking anybody into specific geographies. You're not leaving empty territories sitting there. You're working your best accounts. Now, there's two other things that we typically do in this model. Number one, remember, every rep has the best possible book that they could have. And so if they're not working that book, those accounts should be able to be retrieved and redistributed to someone who will. And so that's usually part of this. There's a use it or lose it component to this model. And then, of course, we need to deal with inbounds. You've got hand raisers, you've got signals. When that happens, you want to distribute those accounts to reps that have capacity to take them on. And so you've created an integrated model across your proactive outbound, your inbound, your reactive inbound, that's capacity constrained, so every rep is focused on the accounts you want them to focus on. So let's look at how that impacts this core thing about account strategy and how this lets you execute faster from an OODA loop perspective. Now, all of us as sales leaders in this room have to make big, painful, sometimes annoying decisions because we know we're going to have to go deploy our resources somewhere. So let's take the context of a particular decision. Let's say I was talking to somebody earlier who wanted to focus on a vertical, potentially, right? But this is a very common thing. And so if you think about how you want to focus on a vertical, this is how the OODA loop applies in this case. So first of all, you're going to observe, you're going to see your success in that vertical. Now, you've got all the tools that you have previously about win rate and coverage and all those types of things, but you've also got more useful data that you're capturing. You know all those return reasons. Did it turn out we only had a few flukes and everybody else you're talking to is actually using this competitor and there's a big product gap that's going to make it so you won't be able to succeed in this vertical. So you capture more useful data, and then finally you're orienting yourself around more visibility. You've got more visibility earlier in the sales cycle. You've got more certainty around your decisions. Not only do you have more information, but you have the opportunity to be dynamic. It's in the name. And what that means is this isn't a one-time carve. You can adjust, you can make changes over time based on what you learn. And so finally, when you want to tackle a new target, you can go very quickly. You start distributing those new targets, and suddenly your reps' books start to fill with accounts that you want to focus on. And it's not an enablement effort to make them go focus on these 300 accounts within their 2,000 patch, right? And all of this fits together so that you get feedback in days, not weeks. So the question here is this right for you, right? It's not right for everybody. So let's talk about making that decision. I like to think about this through the territory family tree, territory flavors, whatever you want to say. But on one side of the territory tree are the static models. This is probably how sales has done this for the last 100 years. It's probably how you've done it most of your career. It's that one-time carve. So when should you use a static model? Well, when geography really and truly matters in your business. If you are selling insurance and you have 50 different business and legal regimes across states, use a geographic model. But in most cases, with all sales being done online for the most part, geography doesn't matter as much as you think. So the next might be vertical, right? So a lot of people think that if we kind of focus in on a specific vertical, like we'll get some additional oomph at the margin. That might be true, right? But what happens a lot of times with verticals is you end up in a situation where one vertical is nascent and it's much smaller, and one vertical is more proven out and it's much larger. And then how do you distribute your quota capacity across those? But if you sell a completely different solution to financial services than you do to healthcare, knock yourself out. Vertical's the right thing to do. Now you might be able to run a dynamic model inside your verticals, but that's a 201 topic. So, all right. Lastly, you're selling airplanes, selling whatever, 18-month sales cycles. I have no idea how long it takes to sell an airplane. I'm at time, especially if you're Boeing. But if you're selling to the Fortune 50, long sales cycles, 7-figure deals, use named accounts. Like, just stop with anything else. This is what you need to do, right? But on the dynamic side, this is the other part of the family tree. When we talk about dynamic motions around territory, this is where everybody goes, round robin, right? And if you are at any level of maturity and you're not just starting out with a pretty small number of reps, or you're not one of the really lucky people who just has a flood of inbound, you know that round robin starts to break down pretty quickly. And it turns into something we affectionately call the Wild West, where reps are just kind of pulling things out of CRM as well as handling whatever comes in, and that's a real challenge. So when we place dynamic books into this family tree, what you're really getting here is this level of dynamism, this ability to react to demand and to spread that demand across your quota capacity. You have that, but you also retain the level of control and focus that you get from a static territory model. So in many ways, I think it's the best of all of these solutions, or I wouldn't be having this conversation with you right now. But I'll end with a quick story. And I want to tell you about one of our customers, Box. Hopefully some of you have heard of Box. About a year ago, their VP of commercial sales sent me a text and said, hey, can we chat? And so we jumped on the phone. And this is middle of 2003, so he starts out the conversation by saying, hey, we're getting beat up on the street because we're not profitable. We're not growing very fast. I know that my budget is not going to increase. I'm not going to get more headcount. I may have to make do with less headcount. So I got to figure out what to do. And we've been really living off of inbounds for the last couple of years, right? And really our whole existence. So we got to figure out a way to outbound more. I know we got to do that so we can control our destiny. We got to figure out a way that we can drive bigger deals. Even though we're a commercial team, we need to get bigger deals out of this. And so he's like, I don't really know how we're going to do this. And I said, well, okay, so I'm going to ask you a weird question. So tell me about your territory. I've got a hammer, so here's a nail, right? And so tell me about your territory. And he said, well, it's geo-based, right? If somebody raises a hand or somebody buys something online, wherever their HQ is, that goes to that rep. I said, okay, all right. He's like, and then the reps, go outbound to their territory to make up the difference. It's like pretty standard. It's like, okay. So tell me about your attainment. It's like, well, is pretty uneven, right? We've got some reps who have a ton of online transactions that happen in their territory, and they just kind of sit back and collect those and then hit the rest of the 20% of their number kind of by luck, right? We've got other reps who are just scrambling day in and day out, and I don't think they're bad reps, but they're just struggling in the territory that they're in. And so I suggested, what if we were able to take all those inside sellers that you've got, and we were able to more effectively focus them on outbounding, more effectively distribute the market across them. And so we talked about dynamic books, and lo and behold, about 6 months later, this is enterprise sales, not quite airplanes, but took a little time. They deploy this, right? And if any of you saw their last quarter earnings, great profitability, really strong growth. And if we zoom in to our VP of Commercial Sales team, he's getting exactly what he's looking for. He's seeing increased average deal size. He's seeing more account coverage. Everything that he was looking for from this transformation is happening. And it's not just him, it's something that's actually kind of suffusing through the whole organization. So recently we did a customer summit, and we had the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Strategy at Box talking about deploying this. And she dropped this quote on it: "It's my favorite transformational systems change for our business." Now, it's a very RevOps thing to say, my favorite transformational systems change, but the reality of this is that this is having a significant impact for them because it sits at the foundation of how they operate. And as we think about how we change those foundations to deal with the shocks we've experienced with COVID, with ZERP, with DZERP, PEG, I guess, Sam, and then finally, whatever's going to happen with AI, we know we got to move faster. And I want us to think about the OODA loop as a concept for that. Where do we move quickly? Where do we move slowly? Use that throughout your organization. But I would posit that one of the things that you should think about is that the way you do territory right now, mid-year, is slowing you down. It is causing you challenges. And when you actually pop open the hood and you think about that for a minute, you'll see where they are. You'll see them come out in uneven pipeline. You'll see them come out in uneven attainment. You'll see that come out in accounts that you know should be covered that nobody's reaching out to. So that inefficiency sits at the core of your org. Dynamic Books gives you an answer to that. You can start applying some of these principles to what you do to make sure that the second half is effective for you. So if this is something that's interesting to you, we have a lot of Dynamic Books resources about what's worked, what's not, how to implement this, how to get started at GradientWorks/CRO 2024. Or you can find me at our table and grab a tiki mug, and we'll talk about this more. So thank you, everybody.